I am pleased to announce that we have one more insightful conversation on the India-Middle East Economic Corridor and how it can contribute on the development of our region. And to this aim, I'm pleased to invite on stage Ms. Marie Harf, who is the National Security Policy and Communication Strategist and Executive Director of the Perry World House, and a Fox News contributor as well. Mary, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I know we are the last panel before lunch, so we will attempt to make this a very interactive and interesting conversation. It's really lovely to be with you today. Since world leaders signed the MOU creating the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor at the 2023 G20 summit in New Delhi, much attention has been paid to the possibilities. Some criticism has been leveled, much of which I'm sure you're familiar with. And the corridor really was designed to bolster transportation and connectivity between Europe and Asia through rail and shipping infrastructure. It also, I think, quite openly was designed to be a counterweight to the much discussed, much obsessed about Chinese Belt and Road Initiative as well. Prime Minister Modi, in announcing the 2023 MOU at the G20, called it the basis, it said it could become the basis of world trade for centuries to come. Not a little bit of pressure there on folks to implement this. Of course, less than a month after the MOU was signed, the terrorist attacks of October 7th occurred, putting on hold a lot of the work in the Middle East. The corridor does go directly through the Middle East. And today, the future of the project is uncertain at best, I think we could all say. Thank you both for joining this panel on a topic that now has straddled two American administrations. President Biden was the one that signed this MOU in 2023. That's gotten a lot of attention, but the question always is, you know, there's no there yet, right? There's been a lot of question about the routes and the companies and the countries involved. And so I'd like to invite both of you to give some opening remarks about how you see this economic corridor, the potential for it, maybe some of the pitfalls, and then we will have a conversation and also take some questions from all of you. So Dan, do you want to go first?
Definitely.
I think it's on.
Is this on?
It is, yes.
All right, well, I'm delighted to be here. I want to again thank the organizers. It's a privilege to speak to all of you today. What I'd like to do in these kind of brief opening remarks is, one, talk about the competitive backdrop to kind of global connectivity. Very quickly talk about not just IMEC, but some of the other kind of global connectivity visions out there. Talk about what have we learned in the last decade plus doing this, and then finally the way forward. So, as was kind of mentioned at the very beginning, the competitive backdrop, of course, is China's Belt and Road, which was launched in 2013. It's a real cornerstone of China's economic statecraft. I think we're all familiar with the challenges associated with it for receiving countries, whether it's sovereignty violations, unsustainable financing, environmental degradation, or being disconnected from local economic activities. From a US view, China's Belt and Road has very much been a geopolitical tool to create leverage over other countries and potentially pursue military access overseas. I know we're supposed to integrate India's views here, so India has seen it very similarly, with a particular focus on kind of Indian Ocean access for Beijing. So over the last decade, there's been very much a proliferation of other visions, often from the US and Europe, of connectivity. Just to hit a few, there's the EU Global Gateway, and I know we'll hear more, so I won't speak more to that. There's the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, which was launched in 2022 at the G7 summit in Elmau. It aims to invest $600 billion US by 2027. And as of October 2025, at the latest G7, according to the latest G7 statement, had mobilized over $400 billion in investment capital. There's, of course, IMEC, the main kind of subject of today. Launched in 2023 at the G20, it has three pillars: energy, transportation, and digital. And there's already large-scale financing behind it, largely from plans by Gulf countries for their own kind of domestic infrastructure, as well as India. There's other initiatives, and I'm not going to go into detail. Happy we can discuss them later. Middle quarter, of course, and the 3 Cs initiative. So what have we learned over the last 10 plus years since this all started with China's Belt and Road? In the case of China, of the challenges associated with its infrastructure, the one that seems to create, I would say, the most pushback in receiving countries is really sovereignty violations. It's kind of the singular issue. 2, there's still very much a gap between China's rhetoric on its global infrastructure and the reality, but at the same time, China has plowed billions into real projects that exist today. And then in the context of narratives over who's actually promoting global connectivity, even a handful of successful large-scale projects counts a lot. And then finally, that China is adaptive. It has responded to criticism and has tried to move toward a more cleaner, as well as leaner Belt and Road. And also, frankly, Beijing's been concerned about its own unprofitable investments. So what about US and European visions? What have we learned there? I think it's a good moment for self-reflection. One, we have succeeded in developing new tools and instruments to advance global connectivity. On the US side, the Development Finance Corporation. On the EU side, the Global Gateway. But candidly, these mechanisms still have much that is lacking. They haven't developed their own potential. And I'll just speak from kind of the US side here. For the DFC, or Development Finance Corporation, ultimately it hasn't fully leveraged the authorities it received. It's not been agile, hasn't always been fully aligned yet with kind of a foreign policy writ large, and today needs to be reauthorized again. We've also seen that many small-scale projects do not necessarily garner the same recognition as large-scale ones by our competitors, and that the strategic impact of US and EU projects is sometimes diluted when our projects and initiatives pursue many, many different goals all at once. We've also learned that capital mobilized does not necessarily equate to projects started, much less projects completed. And that finally, geopolitical developments on the ground make global connectivity initiatives by the US and EU both more urgent, but also more challenging. And we talked about the more challenging piece already in the case of the wars in the Middle East after October 7, but also, of course, the Kremlin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, complicating the northern quarter, the rail route through Russia. And so we need to do this, but it's really hard given the state of facts on the ground. So what about the way forward? 3 final points. One, it's really time to take stock and ask, to what degree do these many initiatives, IMEC and the others, do they complement or do they compete with each other, not only for funding, but also the attention of policymakers, which is scarce? And are we double counting commitments already made? We need to focus connectivity on hard interests. As publics and democracies increasingly question foreign commitments, it's imperative to anchor overseas connectivity projects in clear self-interest, and this could be access to critical minerals, stable energy supply, or export opportunities and jobs at home. And then last, it's time to take a less is more approach. We want to prioritize key corridors over geographically scattered projects, and without prioritization and concentration, it's challenging to execute projects rapidly and to get credit when we succeed. And finally, from a US perspective, to pull it back to IMEC, of the many initiatives and potential corridors, IMEC should be prioritized. It has buy-in from the current US administration. It has buy-in from the transatlantic partners as well. India views IMEC as critical to its future prosperity and security, and there is significant built-in financing from the Gulf states. This is not to downplay, of course, the many challenges that IMEC also confronts. So with that, thank you. Really excited for the discussion.
Thank you, Dan. Pekka?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I have a small message from my Secretary-General, which reminds us of the transatlantic nature of this event. And he asked me to say this. The European Union and the United States must, in these critical times, turn their shared values into shared solutions. For policymakers, this means aligning incentives. And for scholars and think tankers, it means exploring what works and what doesn't, so we can do better together. So I would like to raise, after Dan outlined very eloquently the objectives of IMEC and the geopolitical objectives of it, how we see it, why the European Union regards IMEC as a strategic, important initiative. First of all, from our own experience, the European integration took a lot of time, but it was a motor of fundamental change on our continent. And we would like to share this experience of regional cooperation and creating common shared governance structures with other regions of the world. And I cannot think of anything kind of like more urgent to do in the Middle East than to kind of like create this kind of common sense and common future objective to the peoples in that war-ridden region. And I think there's a lot we can do to help them, to make them understand that the whole is going to be greater than then the separate part, then the sum of its parts. So we can work on this particular corridor incrementally, as you said, with regional partners, with strategic partners further afield, and very importantly, together with our transatlantic partners. So between the transatlantic partners. I would like to raise 3 other issues that are to explain why this corridor is so important for the EU. Of course, from our own perspective, it aims to achieve safe supply chains, enhance predictability, and greater economic resilience through diversification. And this supports the European goal of strategic autonomy. It doesn't mean that we're going to cut ourselves from the rest of the world. Autonomy means that we are the masters of our own future, and we are not going to be dependent too much on one or the other supplier. Second, this project aligns with the EU's broader objectives of green and digital transition by securing strategic access to resources such as green hydrogen from the Gulf and enhancing connectivity with the Indian subcontinent via undersea cables, the 3 pillars that Dan mentioned earlier. And then a third item that I would like to bring the attention, a little bit echoing what Dan said. The corridor, this plays a crucial role in responding to systemic challenges posed by China. Of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, but also the broader BRICS dynamic. Many people say that BRICS, what does it really mean? What does it really have anything to concretely that affect our lives or our policies? Well, I think the time and the occasions that the BRICS countries spent together finding common solutions, that means that we have to have something also to offer to this group of countries which are growing in importance on the world scene. So this means that this particular initiative, in my opinion, the US interest, and I'm really pleased to see that from one administration to the other, while we have seen that the current administration is maybe not the staunchest supporter of multilateralism, but still in this case it is very positive to see that we are on this together, because it helps anchor India, really a growing superpower, and the Gulf states, very important political and economic player on the world scene, closer to the West. So with this, I would like to just maybe to help the conversation, to raise some questions, because that's also part of my job. I don't represent the European Parliament because I'm not an elected member of the Parliament. I'm an official working there since about 30 years, so I'm part of the furniture over there. So I have a bit of kind of like perspective to policy making, but I'm not making the policies. I'm just trying to advise them. So I'm just putting some questions on the table, and we can maybe use the collective intelligence in the room to kind of like discuss them further. First of all, I would like to address the issue of inclusiveness. So there is, of course, this corridor. It has been kind of like penciled on the map, how it should go, different undersea cables, sea routes, railways, and so on, energy pipelines and so on. But can it really be so exclusive that we can, for example, bypass Egypt? Egypt is a regional player, hugely important partner for the European Union. We just had there was just a summit EU-Egypt yesterday in Brussels. Definitely there is no solution to any kind of like sustainable future for the Middle East without a very active participation of Egypt. Egypt is also growing economically. It has a very educated population, and it's a hugely important regional power. Jordan is part of the project already, but will it really be fully involved, and can it be fully involved without the involvement of the Palestinians? I think there is a huge potential that we're going to miss if we are not going to, by economic integration and incentives, bring the Palestinians also into this. And of course, Palestinian authority, there needs to be a process that leads to the identity of a statehood for the Palestinians. This is the firm position of the European Union. It shares with its regional partners over there. Then another question which I would like to put on the table is how do we then put this into practice, not only by governance structure, so what kind of a joint understanding we have on the priorities and on the road forward, regardless from the changes of government in those countries where governments change on the road of this project, and how we do make sure that the involvement of the business sector becomes inclusive. Definitely, as European Union, we want the European companies be very much involved in this, together with the American companies as well. But it cannot be just like one or the other. And very importantly, the local infrastructure, the local business sector needs to be very closely involved. There is a lot of potential for employment creation, and also we need to make sure that the share, the legitimate share of the profit ends up in the local hands. This is part of also the part of the philosophy and the objectives of the Global Gateway initiative that the European Union is running. We have already we have already reached the 300 billion euro objective in this, but it's really and we are going forward globally. This is part of one of the integrated initiatives in that perspective, but we need to make sure that we create local value and that we make sure that we improve the livelihoods of the people on the ground. So with this, there are many other issues to discuss, the involvement of India, how important it is, or the Gulf countries, but I think we can come back to that in the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you both for your opening remarks. I'm glad that you brought up Egypt. Of course, one of the drivers behind the IMEC corridor is, in fact, the volatility in the Red Sea shipping lanes and Houthi attacks, especially since the war in Gaza. And Egypt's foreign minister just recently said that in order to move forward with IMEC, the Palestinian issue would need some resolution. So I guess one of the questions I have for both of you, building off of that, is the fact that geostrategic plans often run headlong into geopolitical problems, right? And history's littered with examples of big plans for things that fall to the wayside because they can't resolve regional geopolitical issues. Given that the Middle East is a key part of this corridor, in fact, directly in the middle of it, talk a little bit about how you believe this can move forward given what's happening in the region, given Egypt wanting to be a part of it but really isn't yet, the Gulf states trying to reassert, or I should say assert some primacy in the region. Talk a little bit about how you actually view implementation of this given those realities. Either of you can answer that.
Sure, I'm happy to go first, and I'll partly also address kind of the inclusiveness question. So I think one of the things that we've seen over the past decade is sort of the bigger these initiatives get, the more participants, the slower on-the-ground facts change, and people frankly become cynical, whether it's kind of countries that might receive infrastructure or those involved, when you don't actually see projects taking flight and kind of being built. And so I think there is a tricky balance when it comes to inclusiveness. I would say with Egypt, I think thinking long and hard, because the bigger you make these initiatives, frankly, the slower they are. And at a certain point, people move on. And so in terms of the kind of resolution and some of the geopolitical developments, I mean, I may be an optimist here, but I actually would see some of these economic connectivity ambitions, and IMEC in particular, is potentially part of the solution and creating conditions on the ground that create space for sort of more geopolitical stability. I also think ultimately, again, if you start small and targeted, you can move forward in parallel. I mean, whether it's going to take time to resolve any of these conflicts. And so if you sort of wait and don't do anything, you could wait a very long time rather than try to slowly change facts on the ground through connectivity, and maybe that creates space for more geopolitical resolutions as well.
So it's of course a very tricky question, but I really think that in the longer term, creating a common benefit or common interest is going to be more sustainable than kind of like trying to solve issues by force. It took Europe a long time, many centuries, to come to this conclusion. That actually it's better to kind of like to work together rather than to keep on fighting wars between neighbors. It's not going to happen from one day to another, but I think this initiative can really kind of like bring it further and like really show that there will be kind of like joint benefit from that. So I think such efforts like the peace triangle, trying to bring Jordan, Israel, and Palestinians on this economic interdependency kind of issues, water, transport, manufacturing, commerce, and so on. I think that's very, very encouraging. And we should work together, not like between the United States and the European Union, with the UK, other like-minded partners, but as well as with the regional partners, convincing the partners in the Middle East that they have really a big interest in making it happen and building by prosperity a more sustainable future for peaceful. And we do need to kind of like keep the sea routes safe. There are many initiatives that the European Union is running in the seas over there. We are so dependent on the supply route via the Suez Canal that we of course have a vital interest in that. Irini in the Mediterranean Sea, Aspides in the Red Sea, and Atalanta off the Horn of Africa and the Western Indian Ocean. And we are working with the regional partners on this. We cannot do it all alone. We don't have the resources and we don't have the means, but we really they are not contradictory to the idea of building this important new initiative. But yeah, it takes a lot of effort.
Well, there are some analysts that even believe this could help advance Israeli-Saudi normalization. This could play a role in finally getting that, which has been a key goal of both the Biden now and the Trump administration. There are also people who would say when we're focused on economic corridors, we have to do that, I think speaking to Pekka, what you said, not at the expense of addressing humanitarian conditions on the ground. And I think people, when they're looking at the potential for Saudi-Israeli normalization, are of course concerned about the Palestinians. Do you think that this could play a role in greater regional integration beyond just, I mean, it was a version of the question I just asked, but how promising do you actually think that is? And do you think it's too focused on the economic side and not focused enough on the reality on the ground?
I think these two things should go together, but and I think if the US and the EU we work together, I think we have to do, there's a bit of convincing to do on all the sides, especially if we think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The EU has very good offices with the Palestinian Authority, and we all agree actually on the impossible prospect of giving Hamas any role in future Palestinian governance. But we do need to also work with our Israeli partners and create sustainable security for the Israeli state. But I really cannot see, like with the longer perspective on the region, how we can do it without giving also a viable future to the Palestinians. So we really have to keep that in mind and work on this together. And we have channels, both the US and the EU at governmental level and also at parliamentary level. We have regional gatherings of parliamentarians. Maybe we could maybe use some of those regional gatherings of bringing these people at least together, because for the time being they don't even speak to one another. So it's very important to create this opportunity. But of course, at the outset, it's important to make sure that the current ceasefire survives and that all the conditions are implemented. It's a long road, but I don't think there's an alternative for that. If we really want to make this project and the development of the whole region and its integration into world economy possible.
Dan, I want to pick up on something Pekka said, that ideally this would help anchor India and the Gulf states to the west. There's been a lot of discussion about whether, Saudi Arabia and the UAE definitely see themselves as middle powers, at least, independent power centers of their own in the region, not wholly dependent on the United States. India, as Pekka said, a rising superpower. And there's a lot of discussion about the fact that middle powers often don't want to pick a side, right? They'll work with China when they want to, Russia to a lesser extent, the United States when it's beneficial. Do you think that something like IMEC can actually push them to align themselves more with the West? Do you think that should even be a goal? And do you think that that's possible?
Happy to take that on. I would probably bucket India and then the Gulf states separately. India structurally has a geopolitical rivalry with China. They share a border. There's contested land areas. And so I think India structurally is always going to be pushed to align more with the US than China. I think the Gulf states obviously do not have that kind of strategic level of concern about China and are much more, I would say, fluid, or have the ability to be fluid in their approach. I think IMEC is extremely useful in both regards. I think for India, it does, to the extent it does have some room to maneuver, it plugs India more commercially and to some degree geopolitically into sort of the transatlantic space in the Middle East, and cements kind of India's role in the Middle East as well. So I think from an Indian perspective, it obviously is important. I think the Gulf is very interesting when you ask that question. And my perspective would be, whether it's the UAE or Saudi Arabia, it's more a question of degrees of alignment and on what issues, and they are never going to want to fully choose sides, but that IMEC will create, particularly in the economic front, much more opportunity when it comes to their relations with the transatlantic partners. And so, at least in a relative sense, I think there will be more of a pull, again, of a magnetic pull toward the transatlantic partners and potentially away from China.
Dan, can I stay with you for a second and talk a little bit about how conversations around IMEC may have changed in the last year, since we had a drastic change in administration and foreign policy? The Trump team definitely talks about it in a much more US business-focused manner, as they do many things. Also, Trump's relationship with Modi has been difficult, I think maybe is the way to frame it. And finally, I would say the focus in IMEC on long-distance hydrogen pipelines, on clean energy, is not something that the Trump administration is particularly interested in supporting. So can you say a few words from the American perspective about how you see the Trump administration's commitment to this project, focus on it, maybe in contrast to the Bidens, or maybe just in general?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. So in terms of IMEC, I would say IMEC, of course, was launched under the last administration under President Biden. It remained fairly conceptual, and some of that, again, was post-October 7. It was very difficult to move forward, so there were kind of external events. But there wasn't a whole lot of meat on the bones. I think under this administration, there is an interest in putting meat on the bones. At the same time, it is much more explicitly from a kind of US interests and commercial diplomacy perspective. In terms of, again, my kind of view is always efforts have to result in real projects on the ground in a kind of meaningful time frame. And from that perspective, I think might not be a bad thing if you're focusing on kind of US businesses closing deals quickly. So I think we should be open-minded when it comes to what a sort of more business-focused perspective means for IMEC. In terms of the relationship with India, obviously, it's been fluid, to say the least, in the last 6 months. That said, I think there are real structural constraints on both India and the US in terms of how far the relation might decline. Both are very concerned about China geopolitically, and ultimately this pushes them back together. In terms of the kind of clean energy piece, I think it goes without saying that's going to have much less prominence under this administration. Again, sort of independent studies that I've seen suggest some of the kind of clean energy bits of IMEC may be more distant in terms of profitability as well. And I think if you look at kind of the totality of IMEC, there's a lot there. And again, I always think it's important to focus. And so I think whether or not sort of that piece moves forward right now, there's a lot of other opportunities, and it can move. We can still very much sort of move forward.
And if I can add to that from the European Union perspective, the importance of India has been really recognized at the highest level. The College of Commissioners did their first trip abroad to India as a college. We're negotiating for a free trade agreement right now. We have a very ambitious strategic agenda with India, focusing on connectivity, security partnership, technological cooperation. So it's really, really kind of like we recognize that India is developing in a very, very impressive way. It is becoming a global manufacturing hub. It is a center of technological excellence. It has extremely strong links with the United Arab Emirates, all from many points of view, human, economic, and it also then spills over to politics. So it's kind of like really, it really makes sense the way kind of like the three pillars of this corridor to make it happen. So really, maybe it will also go beyond India sometimes, but already as such, India as the starting point of the corridor is hugely important for this part of the world and beyond, on the other side of the Atlantic as well.
We'd say more about beyond India in the corridor. You just said it might eventually go beyond India.
Yes, because I mean, of course, I mean, if we see it that way, that we have the Chinese Pakistan partnership, there could be an interest in Southeast Asia to kind of like link into that to this corridor, and really we have to what I have kind of like observed in the last years especially is that we have to respect the foreign policy and strategic choices of our partners. We cannot choose their governments, and we just have to kind of like find the way to find the common interests and the common objectives, if possible. And India is such a big power that we have to accept that it will not put all its eggs into the IMEC basket. It will still have to find a way to deal with China. China's business sector is hugely present in India, and they are such huge powers in that part of the world that has anyway the majority of the world's population, that they will have to find solutions between themselves as well. But what we can do is to kind of like create these links and create this new avenue for them to have also to spare some eggs also for our basket, and not to kind of like not to abandon them completely to the other side, because of course, like security partnership, which I already mentioned, is of course hugely important for the European Union, and we try to kind of like work with them, because it is not in our interest that the very strong security partnership with another G20 country that currently exists with India is going to grow even further.
Do either of you have a sense, and then I will, if there are any questions in the audience, happy to take a couple in the few minutes we have left. So I will look, yes, I will get to your question in 1 minute. Do you have a sense for how China views this? Do they view it as threatening? Do they view it as unlikely to ever happen? Do they not view it anyway at all? Do you have a sense for the Chinese perspective on this?
So I can definitely speculate. If I was in Beijing, I would see IMEC is really maybe the first sort of initiative that was geographically grand enough to in some ways be a kind of alternative or counterweight to Belt and Road. And a lot of the other kind of initiatives that I talked about were global in scope, but not that focused, and in kind of ways for us to marshal resources, us G7, transatlantic partners, but they weren't that targeted. And so, I mean, I think IMEC, if you sat in Beijing, you'd see this as something potentially serious, that it actually is kind of looks on a map, something like an alternative in the kind of heart of Eurasia to Belt and Road. I think you also would probably see real skepticism that we can pull it off in terms of we can go from just talking about it, lines on a map, to actual projects that have bankable, that have investment, and you see actually facts on the ground. So I think probably from China's perspective, it's very early days, and they'll be watching with interest, but probably skepticism.
You had a question up here. If you'd like to go to a microphone at the back of the room and ask it, we would love to hear it.
So, hello, my name is Victor. I work in management consulting, but actually connectivity is my passion, so this is why I want to ask you. Thank you, gentlemen, for your contributions. If the support team can also help, I've wanted to share with you a bit of a snippet from the Wall Street Journal. They presented the connectivity topics, and you have already talked about the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and do you gentlemen see it, by the way? If not, I'm very sorry. You've already talked about the Belt and Road Initiative and about IMEC, but we still have some other connectivity initiatives in the region. We have the Middle Corridor, which is a sort of grassroots movement that is supported by local countries and would link the East to West. And we also have a very interesting development in Iraq, which would actually shorten the span even more than the IMEC initiative, with Iraq having already started the investments in its docks, and with a bold plan of road and rail that passes the country, it would directly connect shipping routes to Turkey and then to Europe. What is your impression about these two projects, and how do you see their viability? Of course, the initiatives are not mutually exclusive, but I would be interested to hear your take on them. Thank you very much.
I just want to give our questioner some credit for being the first question I've ever seen asked that brought his own slide. So thank you. That's commitment to your question, sir. I know, no, I'm impressed. Either of you would like to take it?
Well, it's a competitive world. And for all of these, or any of these to happen, we need government support and commitment. We need international cooperation and some kind of governance system, or then dominance by one of the players, like it is for the Belt and Road Initiative. But all this is kind of like, I don't see them necessarily as kind of like excluding one or the other. Of course, I mean, if we think about the north-south transport corridor, for the time being, we are not, like in the EU, super keen on that, because we have an issue with the Iranian-Russian partnership. But I forgot to mention, but of course, I mean, we have to have some alternatives also, kind of like, Turkey is an extremely important partner in the region and for Europe, and it is in Europe partially, a candidate country associated with the EU since the 60s. Some rocky roads we have still heading to, we are not yet out of the rocky roads or the rocky seas yet. But we have to have alternatives, like maybe we could even dream of having a Cairo-Istanbul railway reinstalled. It used to exist, but why not? I mean, it would bring people together. It will bring businesses, bring opportunities for commerce between the countries. So I don't think that any of these initiatives are kind of like excluding one another. But of course, we have an interest in some of them, and I think also the U.S. partners, they do, because it depends who is going to be participating, which kind of companies are participating in the procurement procedures. So if our companies are not participating, if it is a dominant power that sets the rules, it's going to be less interesting for us. So we need to have very clear partnership notion behind any of these things that we want to invest in.
I'll be very quick. We have a timer counting down, almost 1 minute left.
I have like a very quick question to end with. So.
All right, I'll be very fast. One, awesome, bringing a map. I've never seen that as well. I think it's a question of levels of emphasis. I think from a U.S. perspective, IMEC very much first. The middle quarter, I think, especially in today's Washington, you'd have questions about to what degree are there opportunities for U.S. business? What's the strategic rationale for connecting kind of Europe and China more closely? And again, just putting out those questions. I think the Iraq Development Road, I haven't tracked it personally. I think it's interesting, again, questions about the security situation where it runs through and then just capital. Who's going to build it? When you look at the IMEC corridors, a lot of these countries are putting in billions of dollars already to their infrastructure.
That was very quick, thank you. So my last question for both of you, if each of you could give one or two things, one or two signposts that you're looking for in the next 3, 6, 12 months that our audience could look for to say, okay, maybe parts of this are actually moving forward. What are some of those early wins you think we should be looking for?
Well, I would really wish that in the next 6 months we have some first steps leading towards a sustainable, peaceful future in the Middle East, with the participation of the United States, the European Union, and other like-minded partners, and the regional powers, and that we are all on this together, and we are not excluding any of the partners. We're trying to look for the joint interest and the joint benefit of that. We need a consensus on the way forward for a peaceful future. This is kind of like the basis for it. So I don't think that beyond that, I think it is important that even the part of the big corridor are kind of like that we have commitment to it, and we start incrementally to implement that in a way that already the parts can be viable and are useful, and then the connections will be made later. But for the whole corridor to be successful, I think we do need sustainable cohabitation in the Middle East.
Dan, final word to you.
All right, I would say in the next 6 months, a signature IMEC project that actually brings together not just kind of government capital, but actually private sector backers, and actually start something changing on the ground.
Great. Again, very, very speedy answer. Please join me in thanking our panelists.